I never thought the words that would shatter my heart would come from my own daughter's mouth, spoken so casually over Sunday dinner, as if I wasn't sitting just one room away. "Mom's becoming such a burden," Sarah's voice carried clearly from the kitchen where she was cleaning dishes with her husband Mark. "I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this. She's always here, always needing something, and honestly it's exhausting." The fork I was holding clattered onto my plate as those words hit me like a physical blow. Burden. After 67 years of life, after raising 3 children as a single mother, after sacrificing my dreams so they could chase theirs, I had become nothing more than a burden to the daughter I loved most in this world. I sat frozen in my chair at the dining room table, surrounded by the remnants of the meal I had prepared entirely myself. The roast beef I'd gotten up at dawn to season, the homemade rolls I'd kneaded with these arthritic hands, the apple pie that had taken me 3 hours to make from scratch. All of it suddenly tasted like ash in my mouth. "Maybe it's time we looked into one of those assisted living places." Mark's voice joined the conversation, and I could hear the relief in his tone. "I mean, she's still pretty independent, but she's not getting any younger. And this house is way too big for her now." My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. This house. The house where I'd brought Sarah home from the hospital 38 years ago. Where I'd nursed her through chickenpox and helped her with homework at this very table. Where I'd hosted her wedding reception in the backyard just 5 years earlier. Too big for me now, apparently. I know, Sarah sighed. And I could picture her pushing her auburn hair behind her ear the way she always did when she was stressed. "I just feel guilty, you know? But you're right. We have our own lives to think about, and with the baby coming." The baby. My first grandchild due in just 4 months. The grandchild I'd been knitting blankets for, whose nursery I'd helped design, whose arrival I'd been counting down the days to. Suddenly, it became clear why I was such an inconvenience. There would be no room for Grandma Ellen when the baby arrived. I closed my eyes and let the weight of their words settle over me like a heavy blanket. At that moment, sitting alone at my dining room table while my daughter discussed disposing of me like an unwanted piece of furniture, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life, my value, my place in this family had been an illusion. But what hurt most wasn't just Sarah's words, it was the casual cruelty of them, the way she spoke about me as if I were already gone, as if my feelings didn't matter, as if the woman who had given up her chance at remarriage to focus on raising her children properly was now nothing more than an obstacle to her convenience. Little did she know that her careless words would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, and that the burden she was so eager to shed would soon become someone else's unexpected blessing. The foundation of everything I thought I knew about my family began cracking that Sunday afternoon, but it had actually been showing hairline fractures for months. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Looking back now, I can trace the subtle changes that had been happening in Sarah's behavior. The gradual shift from loving daughter to someone who saw me as more obligation than family. It started about a year ago, right after she and Mark bought their new house across town. A sprawling 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale neighborhood that screamed success and ambition. Before the move, Sarah used to visit me 3 times a week, sometimes more. She'd stop by after work just to chat, bring me flowers from her garden, or ask for my advice about everything from what to cook for dinner to problems she was having with her job at the marketing firm. We'd sit in my kitchen drinking coffee and talking for hours, the way we had since she was a teenager coming home from dates, spilling all her secrets across my kitchen table. But after the move, the visits became more structured, more dutiful. She'd call ahead now, scheduling our time together like a doctor's appointment. "I'll be over Sunday around 2, Mom. I can stay for about an hour before I need to get back." The spontaneous drop-ins stopped entirely. I told myself it was natural. She was busy with her new house, her new neighborhood, her new life. Mark had gotten a promotion at his accounting firm, and they were traveling in different circles now, attending charity galas and dinner parties with people whose names I read about in the society pages of our local newspaper. I convinced myself that this was just a phase, that once things settled down, we'd go back to the easy closeness we'd always shared. But the distance wasn't just physical. I started noticing how Sarah would check her phone constantly during our visits, how she'd cut our conversations short if Mark called, how she'd grown impatient with my stories about the neighbors or my book club or the volunteer work I did at the local food bank twice a week. "That's nice, Mom," became her standard response to anything I shared. delivered with the kind of polite disinterest you'd show a stranger making small talk in an elevator. The real wake-up call should have been 3 months ago, at her birthday dinner. I had spent weeks planning it, making her favorite meal, chicken marsala with the special sauce recipe I'd perfected over the years, the one she used to beg me to make when she was growing up. I'd bought her a beautiful cashmere scarf in the exact shade of blue that brought out her eyes, and I'd even invited Mark's parents, thinking it would be nice to have a real family celebration. But Sarah spent most of the evening on her phone, texting with friends who were apparently having a much more fun birthday celebration at some trendy rooftop bar downtown. When I presented her with the carefully wrapped gift, she barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "Oh, thanks, Mom. That's nice," she said absently, already looking back at her phone screen. "Actually, Mark and I might head out soon. The Hendersons are having people over, and we really should make an appearance." The Hendersons, her new neighbors with their mansion and their country club membership, and their complete lack of interest in having parents or in-laws around to cramp their sophisticated lifestyle. I watched my daughter choose them over the family dinner I'd spent days preparing, and I felt something shift inside me, though I couldn't quite name it yet. That night, after they left early for their much more important party, I sat alone at my dining room table looking at the barely touched chicken marsala, the untouched birthday cake I'd spent hours decorating with her favorite flowers made from buttercream frosting, the gift that still sat unopened on the counter. For the first time, I wondered if I was really becoming the burden she would later call me so casually. But even then I made excuses for her. She was stressed about work, about the new house, about fitting in with Mark's social circle. I told myself that all young married couples went through phases like this, periods where they had to focus on building their own lives. I convinced myself that our closeness would return, that the daughter who used to call me her best friend was still there underneath all the social climbing and status seeking. I was so wrong. The truth was, Sarah had been systematically writing me out of her life for months, and I'd been too loving, too hopeful, too naive to see it happening. I'd been clinging to memories of who she used to be instead of accepting who she was becoming. Someone who saw her mother not as a person with feelings and dreams and wisdom earned through decades of living, but as an inconvenient reminder of humble beginnings she was trying desperately to leave behind. The Sunday dinner where I overheard her calling me a burden wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of subtle rejection, the final confirmation of what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. My daughter was ashamed of me, and she wanted me out of her life in any way that wouldn't make her look bad to her new friends. But what she didn't know was that while she'd been pulling away from me, someone else had been drawing closer. Someone who saw value where Sarah saw burden, who appreciated wisdom where Sarah saw embarrassment, who understood that love and loyalty were worth more than social status and perfect dinner parties. Someone who was about to receive an opportunity that would change both our lives forever. Her name was Jessica Chen, and for the past 15 years, she had been Sarah's best friend. Though I was beginning to wonder if Sarah deserved such loyalty. Jessica was 35, 3 years younger than Sarah, but in many ways she seemed decades more mature. Where Sarah had grown increasingly self-centered and status-conscious, Jessica remained grounded, kind, and genuinely interested in the people around her. I first met Jessica when she and Sarah were in college together, and from the very beginning, she treated me not like her friend's mother who needed to be tolerated, but like a real person whose thoughts and experiences mattered. While Sarah would roll her eyes if I tried to share a story from my younger days, Jessica would lean forward with genuine interest, asking questions and making connections between my experiences and things happening in the world today. "Ellen, you should write a book about growing up in the 60s, she'd tell me during one of her visits. "The way you describe the changes you witnessed, the social movements you were part of, it's like living history." Jessica worked as a high school history teacher, and she had this wonderful way of making everyone around her feel like their story mattered. She'd often bring her students projects to show me, especially when they were working on units about women's history or social change, because she said my experiences as a single mother in the 70s gave her real-world examples to share with them. "Your generation of women changed everything for us," she told me once, sitting in my kitchen while Sarah was upstairs taking a phone call that stretched on for over an hour. "You had to be so much stronger than we've ever had to be." I hope my students understand that their freedoms didn't just appear out of nowhere. While Sarah had grown embarrassed by her humble beginnings, the small apartment where she'd grown up, the second-hand clothes I dressed her in, the The generic brand groceries we'd survived on while I worked 2 jobs to pay for her dance lessons and college fund. Jessica found these stories inspiring. "You raised 3 successful kids completely on your own," she'd say with admiration. Sarah acts like it was no big deal, but I can't imagine the sacrifice that took. My mom had my dad's help, and she still talks about how hard it was with just 2 of us. Jessica was the one who remembered my birthday when Sarah forgot it last year. She was the one who brought me soup when I had the flu, staying to make sure I was okay even though Sarah was too busy to come check on me. She was the one who listened to my concerns about the changes I was seeing in the neighborhood, who asked about my book club meetings and actually remembered the titles of what we were reading. More importantly, Jessica was the one who seemed to notice that Sarah was treating me differently. "Is everything okay between you and Sarah?" she asked me about 2 months ago, during one of her increasingly frequent solo visits to my house. Sarah had canceled our usual Sunday dinner for the 3rd week in a row, claiming she and Mark had prior commitments, but Jessica had stopped by anyway, bringing Chinese takeout and her infectious smile. "Everything's fine," I lied, not wanting to burden her with family drama or put her in an uncomfortable position between friends. "You know how it is when young couples are getting settled. She's just busy with the new house and everything." But Jessica was too perceptive to be fooled by my diplomatic answer. She set down her chopsticks and looked at me with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see everything. "Ellen, you know you can talk to me, right? I mean, I know I'm Sarah's friend, but I care about you too. You've always been so good to me, and if something's bothering you..." The kindness in her voice almost broke my carefully maintained composure. Here was this young woman, with no obligation to care about me beyond basic politeness, offering genuine concern and support. Meanwhile, my own daughter couldn't be bothered to return my phone calls half the time. "I appreciate that, honey," I said, managing a smile. "Really, everything's fine. Sarah's just growing up, I guess." Jessica nodded, but I could see in her expression that she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, if you ever need anything at all, you have my number. Promise me you'll call if you need someone to talk to." That conversation stayed with me for weeks afterward. There was something in Jessica's tone, a warmth and genuine care that I hadn't heard from my own daughter in months. It made me realize just how starved I'd become for simple human kindness, for someone who saw me as more than an inconvenience or obligation. Jessica had always been different from Sarah's other friends. While Sarah surrounded herself with people who could enhance her social status, the wives of Mark's colleagues, the women from her exclusive gym, the neighbors from her upscale subdivision, Jessica remained unchanged by success or social pressure. She drove a modest Honda Civic while Sarah traded up to a luxury SUV. She lived in a cozy townhouse while Sarah moved to her suburban mansion. She spent her free time volunteering at literacy programs while Sarah attended charity galas that were more about being seen than actually helping anyone. But the biggest difference between them was how they treated the people who couldn't do anything for them in return. Sarah had grown impatient with anyone who didn't fit into her new image. The elderly neighbors who'd watched her grow up, the family friends who'd supported us through difficult times, and increasingly me. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to value people more for who they were than what they could offer her. I started to notice this contrast more acutely during the rare occasions when both women would visit together. Sarah would spend the time checking her phone, making mental notes about things in my house that looked dated or needed updating, and steering conversations toward topics that showcased her new lifestyle. The vacation she and Mark were planning, the expensive restaurant they discovered, the influential people they were now socializing with. Jessica, meanwhile, would ask about my garden, compliment the handmade quilts I'd hung on my walls, and actually listen when I talked about my volunteer work or my book club discussions. She'd notice when I'd rearranged furniture or tried a new recipe, and she'd ask thoughtful questions about my opinions on everything from local politics to social issues. "You know, Ellen," Jessica said during one of these joint visits, "you should really consider joining the Historical Society. They're always looking for people with first-hand knowledge of how our town has changed over the decades. Your perspective would be invaluable." Sarah looked up from her phone with an expression of mild horror. "Mom doesn't want to get involved in all that old people stuff," she said dismissively. "She's got plenty to keep her busy." But Jessica persisted. "What do you think, Ellen? Would you be interested? I know the president of the society, and I could introduce you." The fact that Jessica saw me as someone who had valuable contributions to make, while my own daughter saw me as someone whose interests weren't worth taking seriously, crystallized something I'd been trying to ignore. One of these women saw me as a whole person with wisdom and experiences worth sharing. The other saw me as an aging mother whose opinions and desires were increasingly irrelevant. It was becoming painfully clear which was which. After that terrible Sunday when I overheard Sarah calling me a burden, I couldn't get Jessica out of my mind. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling and replaying my daughter's cruel words, I found myself thinking about all the ways Jessica had shown me kindness and respect over the years. Not because she had to. Not because we were related, but simply because she was the kind of person who valued others for who they were. I thought about the time she'd spent an entire Saturday helping me organize my basement, not because I'd asked her to, but because she'd noticed I was struggling with the project and wanted to help. I thought about how she brought her camera to document my 65th birthday party, making sure every moment was captured and later presenting me with a beautiful photo album. I thought about the way she always hugged me when she arrived, and when she left, real hugs that lasted more than the perfunctory seconds Sarah now allotted for such displays of affection. Most of all, I thought about the conversation we'd had just 2 weeks earlier, when Jessica had stopped by unexpectedly and found me crying over a letter I'd received from the bank about my mortgage refinancing options. "What's wrong, Ellen?" she'd asked immediately, settling down beside me on the couch and taking my hands in hers. I tried to brush it off, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. "It's nothing, dear. Just some financial paperwork that's got me a bit overwhelmed." But Jessica hadn't accepted that easy dismissal. She gently encouraged me to talk about what was bothering me, and before I knew it, I was pouring out all my fears about aging, about managing my finances on a fixed income, about what would happen to me if I couldn't maintain my independence. "I've worked so hard my whole life to keep this house," I told her through my tears. "It's all I have left of the life I built for my children. But sometimes I wonder if I'm just fighting a losing battle. Maybe Sarah's right. Maybe it is too much house for one person." Jessica had listened without judgment, without trying to rush me toward a solution or dismiss my concerns. When I finished talking, she'd squeezed my hands gently. "Ellen, this house isn't too big for you. It's your home. It's where you raised your family, where you've built your memories, where you've created a life you can be proud of. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to give up something so important just because it's convenient for them." Her words had meant more to me than she could possibly know. While my own daughter was discussing my living situation like it was a problem to be solved, Jessica saw it as something precious to be protected. "You know," she'd continued thoughtfully, "my grandmother held on to her house until she was 93. Everyone kept telling her it was too much, but she said her independence was worth more than their convenience. She was right." That night, lying in bed after overhearing Sarah's conversation, I realized that Jessica had shown me more respect and genuine care in 15 years of friendship than my own daughter had shown me in months. While Sarah saw me as a burden to be managed, Jessica saw me as a person whose autonomy and dignity mattered. And that realization sparked an idea that would change everything. Over the next few days, I found myself observing Sarah's behavior with new eyes. And what I saw broke my heart even further. The casual dismissal of my opinions, the impatient sighs when I took too long to get to the point of a story, the way she'd redirect conversations away from topics that interested me toward subjects that showcased her new lifestyle. It was as if she was systematically erasing the mother who had sacrificed everything for her success, replacing me with a convenient fiction of an aging woman who needed managing rather than loving. The breaking point came the following Wednesday, when Sarah called to cancel our usual weekend visit. "I'm sorry, Mom, but Mark's parents are in town, and we're taking them to the country club for brunch on Saturday. Then we have the Morrisons' dinner party on Sunday. You understand, right?" No, I didn't understand. What I understood was that Mark's parents, who lived 2 hours away and visited once every few months, took precedence over the mother who had been available for every crisis, every celebration, every ordinary Tuesday when Sarah just needed someone to talk to. "Of course, dear," I heard myself saying, the same automatic response I'd been giving for months now. "Have a lovely time with Mark's family. Thanks for being so understanding, Mom. You're the best. I'll call you next week and we'll figure out another time." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, looking around at the space that had been the heart of our family for so many years. The table where Sarah had done her homework, the counter where we'd rolled out Christmas cookies together, the breakfast nook where she used to sit and tell me about her dreams and fears and everything in between. All of it was apparently worth sacrificing for brunch at a country club with people who had never shown me a moment's kindness or consideration. That's when I made a decision that would surprise everyone, including myself. I picked up the phone and dialed Jessica's number. "Ellen," she answered on the second ring, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "What a nice surprise. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, honey, but I was wondering if you might have time to come over this weekend. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Of course. I don't have any plans. Is everything okay?" I looked around my kitchen, at the home I'd spent 30 years building, at the life I'd created through decades of hard work and sacrifice and love. "Everything's going to be just fine," I said, and for the first time in months I truly believed it. "I'll bring lunch," Jessica offered immediately. "Is Saturday around noon good for you?" "That would be perfect." "And Jessica? Thank you for everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ellen, you don't need to thank me for anything. I'll see you Saturday." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I was about to take control of my own story, and I was going to do it with the help of someone who had proven that love and loyalty couldn't be taken for granted, but they could be earned, cherished, and rewarded. Sarah had no idea what was coming, but she was about to learn that calling someone a burden has consequences, especially when that someone has options she never bothered to consider. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn sunshine that made everything look golden and full of possibility. I spent the morning cleaning my house with more energy than I'd felt in weeks, not because it needed it, but because I wanted everything to be perfect for this conversation that would change the trajectory of my life. At exactly noon, I heard Jessica's car pull into my driveway, and I watched through the window as she gathered what appeared to be several bags of food from her passenger seat. True to her word, she hadn't just brought lunch. She'd brought enough food for a small celebration. "I got us sandwiches from that deli you love," she said as I opened the door. "Plus those little pastries you mentioned trying the last time we talked, and I may have gone overboard at the farmer's market this morning." She held up a bag of fresh flowers. "I thought these would look beautiful on your table." This was so perfectly Jessica, thoughtful, generous, attentive to details that mattered to me. As I watched her arrange the flowers in my favorite vase, talking cheerfully about her week and asking about mine, I felt more certain than ever that I was making the right decision. We settled at my kitchen table with our lunch, and Jessica immediately launched into a story about one of her students who was working on a project about women's history. "I told her about you, actually, about how you went back to school when Sarah was in high school to get your nursing degree. She was amazed that you managed to work full-time and go to school and still be there for your kids. I think it really opened her eyes about what women of your generation accomplished." I felt tears prick my eyes. When was the last time Sarah had expressed any pride in my accomplishments? When was the last time she'd seen my sacrifices as achievements rather than simply what was expected? "That's very kind of you to say," I managed. "It's not kind, Ellen. It's true. You're an inspiration, whether you realize it or not." This was the opening I needed. I set down my sandwich and looked across the table at this remarkable young woman, who had shown me more genuine affection and respect than my own daughter had in recent memory. "Jessica, there's something I want to talk to you about, and I hope you'll hear me out completely before you respond." She immediately gave me her full attention, setting aside her own lunch and leaning forward with the kind of focused interest that had always made me feel heard and valued. "You know how much you mean to me," I began. "Over the years, you've become so much more than Sarah's friend. You've been like a daughter to me, in many ways more than my actual daughter has been lately." Jessica's expression grew concerned. "Ellen, is everything okay with you and Sarah? I know you said things were fine, but I've been worried." I held up my hand gently. "Let me finish, and then I'll explain everything. What I want to tell you is this. I've decided to make some changes to my will, and I wanted to discuss them with you first." The color drained from Jessica's face. "Ellen, if this is about Sarah, maybe you should talk to her first. I don't want to get in the middle of family issues." "This isn't about getting you in the middle of anything," I said firmly. "This is about recognizing loyalty and love when I see it, and making sure those qualities are rewarded. Jessica, I want to leave this house to you. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the living room. Jessica stared at me with an expression of complete shock, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ellen, she whispered finally, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. This house, everything in it, the small savings account I've managed to build up over the years. I want it all to go to you instead of Sarah. Jessica pushed back from the table and stood up, running her hands through her hair in obvious distress. No, Ellen. No, I can't. Sarah's your daughter. This house should go to her. Whatever's happening between you two, it can be worked out. Sit down, honey. Please. Let me tell you why I've made this decision. Reluctantly, Jessica returned to her chair, but she looked like she was ready to bolt at any moment. Ellen, this is crazy. I mean, I'm honored that you would even think of me, but… Last Sunday, I interrupted. I overheard Sarah talking about me in my own kitchen. She called me a burden, Jessica. She and Mark were discussing putting me in assisted living because taking care of me was becoming too much trouble for them. Jessica's face went through a series of emotions, surprise, hurt, and then anger. She said that? About you. She said exactly that. After I spent the entire day cooking for them. After years of putting their needs before my own. After sacrificing my own dreams to make sure they could pursue theirs. I'm nothing more than a burden to be managed. Ellen, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she felt that way. But you did have an idea, didn't you? You've been noticing how she treats me, how she's changed toward me. That's why you've been visiting more often, why you've been checking on me. Jessica looked down at her hands, and I could see the truth in her expression. I didn't want to say anything because it wasn't my place, but yes, I've been worried about you. Sarah seems so different lately, so focused on her new life that she's forgotten about the people who helped her get there. Exactly. And in all that time while my own daughter was pulling away, you've been drawing closer. You've been the one who remembers my birthday, who asks about my interests, who treats me like a person worth knowing instead of an obligation to be managed. Tears were streaming down Jessica's face now. But Ellen, I did those things because I care about you, not because I expected anything in return. I know that. That's exactly why you deserve this. I reached across the table and took her hands. Jessica, you've shown me more genuine love and respect in the past year than Sarah has shown me in the past 5. You see value where she sees burden. You see wisdom where she sees outdated irrelevance. You've proven that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about loyalty, about showing up when someone needs you. Jessica was crying harder now, shaking her head. What about Sarah? What about your relationship with her? If you do this, it might destroy any chance of repairing things between you. I felt a sad smile cross my face. Honey, there's nothing left to repair. Sarah made her choice when she decided I was too much trouble to bother with. She made it clear that her new life has no room for her old mother. Well, now she won't have to worry about that burden anymore. But what if she changes? What if she realizes what she's doing and wants to make things right? Then she'll have learned a valuable lesson about not taking people for granted, I said firmly. But Jessica, I'm not making this decision out of spite or hurt feelings. I'm making it out of love and gratitude. You've earned this through years of kindness and respect. You've proven that you understand the value of what I'm offering. Not just the financial value, but the emotional significance of a home where someone has built a life. We sat in silence for several minutes while Jessica processed what I'd told her. I could see her wrestling with the enormity of the decision, the complications it would create, the way it would change everything. What would happen to you? She asked finally. I mean, if I inherited the house, where would you live? I smiled at the question because it proved everything I believed about her character. Even in the midst of being offered such an enormous gift, her first concern was for my welfare. That's something we'd need to discuss, I said. I have several options. I could move to one of those nice senior communities across town. Not because I'm being forced to, but because I choose to. Or, if you were amenable to the idea, I could stay here with you for as long as I'm able to live independently. This house has plenty of room for both of us. Jessica looked up sharply. You'd want to stay here? Even after giving me the house? Only if you wanted me to. I know you might want to start your own family someday, have your own space. I wouldn't want to impose. Ellen, you could never be an imposition to me. Never. The fierceness in her voice moved me to tears. If you're serious about this, if you really want to do this, then yes. I would love for you to stay here for as long as you want. This is your home. It should always be your home. And there it was. The response that confirmed everything I believed about Jessica's character. Where Sarah saw my continued presence as a burden to be eliminated, Jessica saw it as a blessing to be treasured. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my purse for the envelope I'd prepared. I've already contacted my lawyer and had new documents drawn up. All I need to do is sign them and have them witnessed. But I wanted to talk to you first, to make sure you were willing to accept this responsibility. Jessica stared at the envelope as if it contained something dangerous. When would it take effect? Immediately upon my death, just like any will. But Jessica, I'm hoping to be around for many more years to see you enjoy what you've earned. She was quiet for a long time, and I could see her thinking through all the implications, all the ways this would change her life and her relationship with Sarah and the entire dynamic of our family. What about Sarah? She asked finally. What about her inheritance? Sarah will inherit my jewelry, my personal items, and a small savings account I've kept separate. It's not nothing, but it's not the house and the bulk of my assets either. She'll be devastated. She'll hate me. Sarah made her choice when she decided I was a burden. Now she gets to live with the consequences of that choice. And if she hates you for accepting something you've earned through years of love and loyalty, then she's not the friend you thought she was anyway. Jessica looked around my kitchen, at the home I was offering to give her, at the life I was inviting her to share. Why are you really doing this, Ellen? And please tell me the truth. I took a deep breath and gave her the most honest answer I could. Because you've shown me that love and respect can't be demanded or assumed. They have to be earned and demonstrated every single day. Because you've proven that family is about more than shared DNA. It's about shared values and genuine care for each other's well-being. And because I want my legacy to go to someone who will treasure it, not someone who sees it as a burden to be managed. And if I say yes, if I agree to this, what happens next? Next, we call my lawyer and arrange to have the papers signed and witnessed. Then we decide how and when to tell Sarah. And then we start building a new kind of family. One based on choice and mutual respect instead of obligation and guilt. Jessica wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. A mixture of love, gratitude, determination, and something that looked very much like fierce protectiveness. Ellen, if you're absolutely sure about this, if this is really what you want, then yes. I accept. And I promise you I will treasure this gift for the rest of my life. I will take care of this house and more importantly, I will take care of you. As I reached across the table to hug this remarkable woman who had chosen to see my worth when my own daughter had forgotten it, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Complete and utter peace with my decision. Sarah had called me a burden, but she was about to discover that this burden came with choices she'd never bothered to consider. And those choices were about to change everything. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal appointments and careful planning. Jessica and I met with my attorney, Harold Morrison, who had been handling my legal affairs for over 20 years. If he was surprised by my decision to leave everything to someone who wasn't my biological child, he was too professional to show it. Mrs. Patterson, he said after reviewing the new documents, I want to make sure you understand that this is a significant change to your estate planning. Your daughter Sarah has been your primary beneficiary for many years. I understand completely, Harold, and I want to make this change. He nodded and turned to Jessica, who had been unusually quiet throughout the appointment. Ms. Chun, do you understand the responsibilities that come with inheriting a property of this size and value? I do, Jessica said firmly, and I want to make it clear that Ellen will always have a home here for as long as she wants it. Harold smiled at that. That's exactly what I hoped to hear. He turned back to me. Ellen, you've raised a remarkable young woman here, even if she's not technically yours. His words stayed with me as we left his office that afternoon. I had raised a remarkable young woman. Just not the one I'd given birth to. During those 2 weeks, Jessica and I spent hours talking about practical matters. Where would she put her furniture when she moved in? How would we handle household expenses? What renovations might the house need in the coming years? But more than that, we talked about our dreams for this new arrangement. I've always wanted a garden, Jessica confessed as we walked through my backyard one evening. Not just flowers but vegetables too. Maybe some fruit trees. This yard is perfect for that, I told her. I used to grow tomatoes and peppers back there when Sarah was little. The soil is wonderful. Maybe you could teach me? I know you have that amazing green thumb. The idea of sharing my gardening knowledge with someone who actually wanted to learn filled me with more joy than I'd felt in months. Sarah had never shown the slightest interest in the garden I'd spent decades perfecting. We also talked about the more difficult aspects of what we were planning. How would we handle Sarah's reaction? What would this mean for Jessica's friendship with her? How would we navigate family gatherings and holidays? I know this is going to change everything, Jessica said during one of these conversations. Sarah might never forgive me. And if she doesn't, what does that tell you about the kind of person she's become? I asked gently. A real friend would want you to be happy, even if it meant accepting that her mother had made different choices than expected. But even as I said those words, I felt a deep sadness about what was likely to happen. Despite everything, Sarah was still my daughter, and I still loved her. I just couldn't continue to accept being treated as less than I was worth. The hardest part was continuing our normal routine, while knowing that everything was about to change. Sarah called twice during those 2 weeks, both times to cancel plans we'd made. The first time, she had a work emergency that required her to go out of town. The second time, she and Mark had been invited to a wedding at the last minute. I'm so sorry, Mom, but you know how these things are. It's important for Mark's career that we attend. Important for Mark's career. Not important to spend time with me, not important to honor commitments she'd made, not important to consider that I might have been looking forward to our time together. Just important for the career and social climbing that had become more valuable to her than family relationships. Each cancellation made me more certain that I was making the right choice. Meanwhile, Jessica continued to visit regularly, often bringing small gifts or surprises that showed she was paying attention to my interests and needs. A book by an author I'd mentioned liking, a new type of tea she thought I might enjoy, a magazine article about the historical society she was still encouraging me to join. You know, she said during one visit, when this house is officially mine, the first thing I want to do is host a dinner party for all your friends from book club. This dining room is perfect for entertaining, and I bet they'd love to see how beautifully you've decorated it. The contrast was striking. Sarah saw my house as too big and outdated, something to be disposed of as quickly as possible. Jessica saw it as a treasure to be shared and celebrated. Finally, the day came when Harold called to let us know the documents were ready for signing. Jessica and I drove to his office together, both of us quiet with the weight of what we were about to make official. As I signed my name on each page, transferring ownership of everything I'd worked for to this remarkable woman who had earned it through simple human decency, I felt a profound sense of rightness about the decision. Congratulations, Harold said when we finished. The documents are now legally binding. Jessica, you are Ellen's primary beneficiary. In the car afterward, Jessica was unusually quiet. Are you having second thoughts? I asked. She shook her head. No, not about accepting. I'm just thinking about Sarah, about how we're going to tell her. I had been thinking about the same thing. I think we should do it soon. The longer we wait, the more difficult it will become. Do you want to tell her alone first, or do you want me there? I considered this carefully. I think she should hear it from both of us. She needs to understand that this wasn't a decision I made lightly or in secret. She needs to see that you tried to talk me out of it, that you were thinking of her feelings even when she wasn't thinking of mine. Jessica nodded. When? This Sunday. I'll call and ask her to come for dinner. One last family meal in the house that won't be hers. As we drove home to the house that was now legally Jessica's, though she wouldn't inherit it until my death, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement about the future. Whatever Sarah's reaction would be, whatever complications this decision would create, I knew I had chosen correctly. I had chosen to reward loyalty over entitlement, love over obligation, and genuine care over biological connection. Sarah had taught me that being someone's daughter didn't automatically make you deserving of their legacy. Jessica had taught me that being someone's chosen family could make you worthy of everything. Sunday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that seemed to match the weight of what Jessica and I were about to do. I spent the morning preparing Sarah's favorite meal, beef bourguignon with the special sauce she'd always loved, homemade dinner rolls, and the green bean casserole she used to request for every birthday. It felt appropriate somehow, cooking one last elaborate meal for the daughter who had grown too busy and important to appreciate the effort that went into such gestures. After today, I wouldn't be cooking for someone who saw my efforts as expectations rather than expressions of love. Jessica arrived an hour before Sarah was due, bringing flowers and offering to help with final preparations. She looked nervous, her usual confidence replaced by obvious anxiety about the conversation ahead. "Are you sure you want me here when you tell her?" she asked for the third time. "This might be easier if it's just between you and Sarah initially." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "You're part of this family now, whether Sarah likes it or not. You deserve to be here for this conversation." At exactly 5 o'clock, Sarah's luxury SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I could see her checking her appearance in the rearview mirror, the same automatic gesture she'd been making since high school. Some things never changed. But as I watched her walk up the path to my front door, I realized how much she had changed in ways that mattered more. The confident stride, the expensive clothes, the perfectly styled hair. All of it projected success and sophistication. But there was something missing from her expression, a warmth that used to be there whenever she came home. "Hi, Mom," she said, giving me the brief, perfunctory hug that had become our standard greeting. "Something smells amazing. You really went all out." "I always do," I replied, and maybe there was a bit more edge in my voice than usual because Sarah glanced at me with mild surprise. That's when she noticed Jessica sitting at the kitchen table, and her expression shifted to confusion. "Jess? I didn't know you were going to be here." Jessica stood up, and I could see her hands trembling slightly. "Hi, Sarah. Your mom invited me to join you for dinner." "Oh." Sarah looked between us, clearly puzzled by this deviation from our usual routine. "Well, that's nice. It's been a while since the three of us had dinner together." Actually, it had been over 6 months, not that Sarah had apparently noticed or cared. We made small talk during the meal, with Sarah dominating the conversation as usual, regaling us with stories about her new social circle, her upcoming vacation plans, and the latest renovations she and Mark were planning for their house. She barely paused to ask about Jessica's work or my activities, and when we did manage to share something, she responded with polite but disinterested acknowledgments. "Mom, you really should think about downsizing this place," she said at one point, gesturing around the dining room with her fork. "All this space for just one person seems like such a waste. Plus, think about how much money you'd save on utilities and maintenance." I caught Jessica's eye across the table and saw the flash of anger that crossed her face at Sarah's casual dismissal of my home. "I like my space," I said quietly. "This house holds a lot of memories." "I know, but memories don't require square footage," Sarah replied with a laugh that felt dismissive. "You could keep all your important things in a nice little condo somewhere. Much more practical." Practical. Everything was about practicality and efficiency with Sarah now, never about emotion or attachment or the intangible value of a place where you built a life. After dinner, as I served the apple pie I'd made from scratch, I knew the moment had arrived. "Sarah, there's something Jessica and I need to discuss with you." Sarah looked up from her dessert, finally sensing that this wasn't just a casual family dinner. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and dove in. "I've made some changes to my will, and I wanted you to hear about them from me directly." The fork in Sarah's hand stopped halfway to her mouth. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "I've decided to leave the house and the majority of my assets to Jessica." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally anger. "What?" she whispered. "I've left the house to Jessica," I repeated calmly, "along with my savings and investments. You'll still inherit my jewelry, personal items, and the smaller savings account, but the house goes to Jessica." Sarah's face was turning red, and I could see her struggling to process what she'd just heard. "Mom, this has to be some kind of joke." "It's not a joke, Sarah," She turned to Jessica with an expression of fury. What did you do? How did you manipulate her into this? Sarah, stop. I stood up, my voice sharper than it had been in months. Jessica didn't manipulate me into anything. In fact, she tried to talk me out of it. I did, Jessica said quietly. Ellen, maybe I should go. This should be between you and Sarah. No, I said firmly. You're staying. You're part of this family now. I turned back to Sarah. Do you want to know why I made this decision? Because you've lost your mind? Sarah shot back, her composure completely shattered. Mom, Jessica isn't even family. Isn't she? She's shown me more love and respect in the past year than you've shown me in the past 5. That's not true. Really? When was the last time you visited me without canceling at the last minute? When was the last time you asked about my interests instead of just talking about your own life? When was the last time you treated me like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered, instead of an obligation you had to manage? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently unable to come up with an answer. Last Sunday, I continued, I overheard you talking about me in my own kitchen. You called me a burden, Sarah. You and Mark were discussing putting me in assisted living because taking care of me was becoming too inconvenient for your busy social schedule. The color drained from Sarah's face. Mom, that's not what I meant. What exactly did you mean when you said your mother was such a burden, and you didn't know how much longer you could keep doing this? Sarah looked stricken. We were just talking through options. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did you mean it, then? Because from where I was sitting, it sounded like you were discussing how to get rid of me as efficiently as possible. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. Mom, I love you. I would never want to get rid of you. Then why have you been pulling away from me? Why do Mark's parents, who live 2 hours away and visit twice a year, take precedence over the mother who has been available for every crisis and celebration in your life? Why is your country club brunch more important than the dinner I spent all day preparing for your birthday? Sarah was sobbing now, and despite my anger and hurt, my heart ached for her. But I couldn't let sympathy derail this conversation that was years overdue. Jessica, I said, turning to the young woman who had been sitting quietly through this emotional confrontation, tell Sarah how you've treated me over the years. Jessica looked uncomfortable being put on the spot, but she answered honestly. I've treated Ellen the way anyone should treat someone they care about. I visit regularly, I ask about her interests, I include her in my life because I value her wisdom and her company. And why do you do those things? I prompted. Because I love her, Jessica said simply. Because she's been like a mother to me. And because she deserves to be treated with respect and appreciation. I turned back to Sarah. That's the difference. Jessica loves me for who I am. You've started to see me as who I used to be. Someone whose primary value was in what I could do for you. When I stopped being useful in the ways you needed, I became a burden to be managed. That's not true. Sarah protested. Then prove it, I said. Tell me 3 things about my life right now that don't involve you or your needs. Tell me about my volunteer work, my book club, my interests, my dreams for the future. Sarah stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of everything she couldn't answer. I thought so, I said sadly. Sarah, somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a complete person with my own life and interests. I became just Mom. Someone who existed to serve your needs and then fade quietly into the background when you didn't need me anymore. But I'm your daughter, Sarah whispered. Doesn't that count for something? Being my daughter means you had my unconditional love and support for 38 years. It doesn't mean you automatically deserve my legacy, especially when you've made it clear that you see that legacy as a burden rather than a gift. Jessica spoke up for the first time since the confrontation began. Sarah, I want you to know that I never asked for this. I never expected it. When Ellen first told me what she wanted to do, I tried to talk her out of it because I was thinking of you. But you didn't try hard enough, did you? Sarah snapped, her grief turning back to anger. You could have refused. You could have told her you wouldn't accept it. And let her leave everything to a stranger instead? Jessica replied calmly. Because that's what she said she'd do if I refused. She was going to donate everything to charity, rather than leave it to someone who saw it as a burden. Sarah turned back to me with disbelief. You would have given everything away rather than leave it to your own daughter? I would have given it to someone who would appreciate it, yes. Sarah, this house, this life I've built. It's not just about monetary value. It's about love and memories and the recognition that someone worked hard to create something meaningful. Jessica understands that. You see it as square footage that's inconvenient to maintain. I can change, Sarah said desperately. I can be better. I can spend more time with you, I can. Can you? I interrupted. Or would you just be going through the motions to try to get me to change my will back? Sarah, if it takes the threat of losing your inheritance to make you treat me with basic respect and kindness, then what does that say about your love for me? The question hung in the air between us, and I could see Sarah wrestling with the implications of what I'd asked. Because the truth was, if she suddenly started being a loving, attentive daughter only after learning about the will change, it would prove that her affection was conditional on what she stood to gain. This is crazy, Sarah said finally, wiping her eyes. People are going to think Jessica manipulated you, that she took advantage of an elderly woman. Let them think whatever they want, I replied. The people whose opinions matter will see the truth, that I chose to reward loyalty and genuine care over entitlement and blood relation. Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't believe this is happening. My own mother is choosing a stranger over her own daughter. Jessica isn't a stranger to me, Sarah. She's been more of a daughter to me lately than you have. The words hit their target, and Sarah flinched as if I'd slapped her. But sometimes the truth hurts, and this truth had been building for months. I need to go, Sarah said, her voice thick with tears. I need to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. As Sarah gathered her purse and coat, she turned back to us one more time. Is there anything I can do to change your mind? The question broke my heart, because it showed that she still didn't understand what had led to this moment. She was thinking about this as a problem to be solved, a negotiation to be won, rather than the result of months of taking me for granted. Sarah, I said gently, the only thing that could change my mind is if you could show me that you value me for who I am, not what you can get from me. But that's something that has to come from your heart, not from wanting to change my will. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. Jessica and I sat in silence as we heard her car start up and drive away. That was harder than I expected, Jessica said finally. It was necessary, I replied, though my heart was breaking for the relationship with my daughter that might never be repaired. She needed to understand that actions have consequences, and that love can't be taken for granted. Do you think she'll ever forgive us? I considered the question carefully. I think that depends on whether she's capable of the kind of self-reflection that would help her understand why I made this choice. If she can look honestly at how she's been treating me and make real changes, not because she wants something from me, but because she genuinely wants to be a better person, then maybe. And if she can't, then I'll be sad about it for the rest of my life, but I won't regret this decision. Jessica, you've shown me that it's possible to choose your family based on love and respect, rather than just accepting whatever treatment you get because of shared DNA. That night, after Jessica went home to her apartment to begin planning her eventual move, I sat alone in my house, the house that now legally belonged to someone who saw its true value, and reflected on what had happened. Had I been too harsh? Had I destroyed my relationship with my daughter over hurt feelings and wounded pride? But as I looked around at the dining room where I'd served so many meals to people I loved, at the living room where I'd celebrated holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday evenings, at the kitchen where I'd nurtured my family for decades, I knew I had made the right choice. This wasn't about revenge or spite. This was about recognizing that love is a choice that has to be made every day, and that legacy should go to those who understand its true value. Sarah had called me a burden, but she was about to learn that this burden came with the power to choose who would benefit from a lifetime of love and sacrifice. And that choice had consequences that would last long after I was gone. The following weeks unfolded in ways I both expected and dreaded. Sarah didn't call for 5 days after our confrontation, and when she finally did, her voice was strained and formal, like she was talking to a distant acquaintance rather than her mother. "Hi, Mom. I was calling to check on you." Check on me. Not because she missed talking to me or wanted to share something from her life, but to check on me like I was a responsibility she was reluctantly fulfilling. I'm fine, dear. How are you? I'm processing everything. Mark thinks I should talk to a lawyer about contesting the will. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. And what do you think? There was a long pause. I think I'm hurt and confused and I don't understand how we got here. We got here because you stopped seeing me as a person worth knowing and started seeing me as a problem to be managed. I said gently but firmly. Sarah, if you want to contest the will, that's your right. But before you do, I want you to ask yourself something. Are you upset because you've lost something valuable? Or are you upset because you've realized what your behavior has cost you? Another pause. I don't know the difference anymore. At least that was honest. The difference is whether you're motivated by greed or by genuine remorse. If it's greed, then go ahead and contest the will. If it's remorse, then maybe we can find a way to rebuild our relationship that doesn't depend on your inheritance. Can I come see you this weekend? To talk. Of course. You're always welcome here, Sarah. That hasn't changed. When Sarah arrived that Saturday, she looked terrible. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled. Her eyes were red from crying, and she seemed to have aged years in the past week. Mom, I need you to help me understand something, she said as we sat in my living room. When did I become such a terrible daughter? The question was asked with such genuine pain that I felt my heart break a little. You're not a terrible daughter, Sarah. You just lost your way for a while. But how? I love you. I've always loved you. I know you love me. But love without respect, love without consideration, love without genuine interest in the other person's well-being. That's not enough to sustain a relationship. Sarah was crying now, and I moved to sit beside her on the couch, taking her hands the way I had when she was a little girl with scraped knees and hurt feelings. Tell me what I did wrong, she whispered. Tell me how to fix it. Sarah, honey, this isn't something I can fix for you. This is something you have to figure out yourself. But I can tell you what I've been missing from our relationship. I spent the next hour explaining everything I'd been feeling over the past months. The canceled visits, the dismissive responses to my interests, the way she'd started treating my home as an inconvenience rather than the heart of our family memories. I told her about overhearing the conversation where she called me a burden, about feeling invisible in my own daughter's life, about watching her choose status and social climbing over family connections. I didn't realize, she kept saying. I didn't mean for you to feel that way. But that's part of the problem, Sarah. You didn't realize because you weren't paying attention. You were so focused on your new life that you forgot about the people who helped you build it. What can I do? How can I show you that I want to change? I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and saw something I hadn't seen in months. Genuine remorse and a desire to do better. You can start by showing interest in my life that isn't related to your needs, I said. Ask me about my volunteer work and actually listen to the answer. Ask me about the books I'm reading, the friends I spend time with, the things I dream about doing. Treat me like a complete person, not just like Mom. I can do that. You can also stop trying to manage my life for your convenience. Stop telling me my house is too big or that I should downsize. Stop canceling our plans whenever something more socially advantageous comes up. Stop treating time with me like a duty you have to fulfill instead of something you genuinely enjoy. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I can do that too. But Mom, is it too late? Have I ruined things between us forever? I pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in months, it felt like I was holding my real daughter instead of the sophisticated stranger she'd become. It's not too late to rebuild our relationship, Sarah. But I'm not changing my will. She pulled back to look at me. Even if I change, even if I become the daughter you want me to be, especially if you change, because if you change for the right reasons, because you genuinely want to be a better person and daughter, then you'll understand why Jessica deserved this gift. You'll be happy that someone who showed me love and respect is being rewarded for it. And if I change for the wrong reasons, then you'll still be thinking of this as a transaction instead of a relationship, and we'll be right back where we started. Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally, she asked, what happens now? Now you decide who you want to be. Do you want to be someone who loves people conditionally, based on what they can do for you? Or do you want to be someone who loves people for who they are, even when it's not convenient or socially advantageous? I want to be better, she said softly. I want to be the daughter you deserve. Then be that daughter. Not because you want something from me, but because it's who you want to be. Over the following months, something remarkable happened. Sarah began to change, slowly and sometimes imperfectly but genuinely. She started visiting more regularly, and actually staying for the full visit instead of looking for excuses to leave early. She asked about my volunteer work, and seemed genuinely interested in my stories about the food bank clients. She remembered details from our previous conversations and followed up on them. Most importantly, she stopped trying to manage my life and started participating in it. Instead of telling me my house was too big, she complimented the new curtains I'd hung in the guest room. Instead of suggesting I needed more practical interests, she asked if she could come to one of my book club meetings. Jessica, meanwhile, had begun the gradual process of moving her belongings into my house. We decided she would move into the guest suite on the second floor, giving us both privacy while allowing us to share common areas. It was working beautifully, better than I'd dared to hope. The three of us even had dinner together several times, and while there was initial awkwardness between Sarah and Jessica, they gradually found their way back to a friendship based on mutual respect rather than shared social status. I owe you an apology, Sarah said to Jessica one evening after we'd finished dinner. I said some terrible things when Mom first told me about the will change. You were hurt, Jessica replied graciously. I understood that. No, I was angry and entitled, and I acted like a spoiled brat. You've been nothing but kind to my mother, and she's lucky to have you in her life. That was when I knew Sarah's changes were real. She wasn't just going through the motions to try to get back in my good graces. She was genuinely becoming a better person. But the will didn't change. 1 year later, as I write this story, I'm sitting in my kitchen watching Jessica tend the vegetable garden she planted in my backyard, while Sarah helps her weed the tomato plants. The two of them have become genuine friends again, and Sarah has become the daughter I always hoped she could be. She calls just to chat, remembers my birthday without prompting, includes me in family decisions, and treats my home as the precious repository of memories it is rather than an inconvenient burden. She's even joined my book club, and has become one of our most enthusiastic members. But the house will still go to Jessica when I die, and Sarah has finally come to understand why. Mom, she said to me just last week, I know you're not going to change your will, and I want you to know that I'm okay with that. I understand now why you made that choice, and I'm grateful that Jessica was there for you when I wasn't. Are you sure about that? I asked because I needed to know her acceptance was genuine. I'm sure. I was a terrible daughter for a while there, and Jessica was the daughter you deserved. She earned this through years of love and loyalty, and I almost lost it through years of taking you for granted. You're not a terrible daughter anymore. No, but I learned that being a good daughter is a choice I have to make every day, not just something that happens automatically because we share DNA. That conversation was the final confirmation that I'd made the right choice. Sarah had learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach her. That love is demonstrated through actions, that respect is earned through consistent kindness, and that family is built through choice as much as blood. The burden she once complained about had become the teacher who helped her become a better person. And the woman she dismissed as insignificant had the power to choose who would benefit from a lifetime of sacrifice and love. In the end, everyone got what they deserved. Jessica got the home and security she'd earned through years of genuine care. Sarah got the opportunity to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than entitlement. And I got to live out my remaining years surrounded by two women who chose to love me for who I am rather than what I can give them. Sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach someone is that your love is precious, your respect must be earned, and your legacy will go to those who understand its true value. My daughter called me a burden, but that burden taught her the most important lesson of her life. And in the end, we all discovered that the heaviest burdens often carry the greatest gifts, if we're wise enough to recognize their worth.